Hello, and welcome to Why Make, where we talk with makers from different disciplines about what inspires them to make. I am your host, Erik Wolken. If you'd like to learn more about Why Make, please go to our website, why-make.com. Also, please consider supporting Why Make by again going to why-make.com and clicking the donate button. All donations are tax deductible through our fiscal sponsor, Fractured Atlas.
I cannot see ye, moon, from my side of the plain, but I know you are above me, beyond my vantage. We fly above the clouds, but I see your light cast below on a puffy midnight ocean cloud. Gliding like a bird, we are the fastest, majestic machine. I wish I could see the moon.
That is Steve Fishman, this episode's guest. Steve is a printmaker and a painter in watercolors and acrylics, and a master of the mighty pencil. He is also a teacher and someone who thinks a lot about the process of making art. So journey back with me a little bit to May of 2023, and I'm thinking about how to add some new elements to the podcast, and I come up with the idea of trying to follow the thought process of creating one specific piece of art or body of work. And I recall the opening animation from the Anthony Bourdain PBS series Mind of a Chef, of a working mind, and so in a direct ripoff, I decided to call these pieces Mind of a Maker. It will be a mini-series within the podcast and also include short films because I love to make more work for myself. So the first thing I need is a guest/guinea pig to try out the idea, and the choice was easy. My good friend Steve Fishman, who I've spent endless hours talking about art and art making with, and he was a more than willing victim. I also knew that he had recently completed work on an exhibition of moon-inspired paintings, and as Steve and I are both fond of saying, Bob's your uncle. I had a subject and the topic for my experiment. We had a great conversation, as you'll shortly hear, but then a year went by, as years often tend to do, and my interview with Steve was sitting on the shelf waiting for the right moment to come along, and that moment is April of 2024, and I'm talking with Steve, who was in Cleveland taking care of his mom, and even though he had never planned to be in the path of totality for the lunar eclipse event, there he is. It was kind of a miracle, a serendipity for an artist who has been so focused on paintings of the moon that I thought I had the missing piece to my story. So I had Steve over for one final session to talk about his eclipse experience, and somehow he managed to paint yet a different ending to this conversation. Without further ado, here's the first episode of the Mind of a Maker series, I Want to Paint the Moon with Steve Fishman. A short film version of this story with selections from Fishman's moon-inspired artwork is on the video page of our website, why-make.com, and also on our YouTube channel. Just like to open up with the very basics making question, which is the basic why make question, which is, what is your first memory of making something? Let's go back to the beginning.
Sure, that's very good. I was about, probably in fourth grade or something like that. I was given some tempera paints and some brushes and some black paper. And I had no idea what I was doing. And out of that formula of stuff, I began to see the possibilities of what I was making. And I could actually see into it. I don't know how I got there, but I basically drew an airplane. I painted an airplane, and it had qualities that I identified as airplane, but I had no understanding of like how I created that. Very interesting little moment, and I hadn't thought about it until you just asked me that question. So it was a visual learning
Right. And actually you did, I think, which is what every artist's ultimate goal is, which is to thrill themselves. I mean, that's all we can ever hope for, is really to knock our own socks off.
And sometimes just when you begin to scratch the curiosity bone, which is what I call it, you begin to wonder, and that wonder creates kind of makes its own gravy. That wonder sort of begins to evolve into another. If this is so, then how do we get to why not this and why not that? And so for me, I'm sort of expounding on your question a little bit, but I go further and think that it's not just a one moment problem solving, because solving that problem brings up all kinds of ancillary issues and problems and opportunities.
To sort of follow up on your first memory of making something, when was that point that you knew that making was going to be your passion? That this was something you were going to spend the rest of your life going down that rabbit hole?
Probably when I went to art school. Probably not until I went to college. I went to art school at Kent State. And sitting in, I think the first time was drawing, was in a figure drawing class. And I just got totally pulled into an understanding, a tactile understanding of the model and how I could take notes on it. I call it taking notes now, but at that time I was trying to make a good drawing. But it totally pulled me down a rabbit hole where I realized that it taught me a way to see and think and concentrate that I hadn't learned before.
How do you think it did that? How do you think you were actually able to take visual information and make notes?
Uh, that's a darn good question. It's a quest of mine that still goes on. Um, I wasn't even aware of it at the time. I just knew that something cool was happening and I wanted to stay there. It was almost like a brain state, there was like a certain alignment of brain firings and chemistry where I was locked in. And when I came away from that, the world seemed different to me. And what I looked at seemed different. And it's like, oh, if I learned this from drawing that, oh, now I see there's a positive and negative space relationship in these other forms. And I start to see it was a teacher that was, in an ongoing process.
Do you think that was the beginning, speaking of process, do you think that was the beginning of learning a process of making art? Do you think that is how you make art to this day, those early lessons in figure drawing?
In a way, yes. Yeah. I mean, and the other thing is that this is going to sound kind of weird, but it taught me how to read because it taught me to hold my focus still in a way that I had never learned before. And suddenly reading and observing and listening became a different activity. It quieted me in a way. There may have been some. I don't understand. I don't understand how the brain works, but it's fascinating to me, and I'm always looking for those opportunities to say, "Oh, look at that."
You work in a couple of different mediums. You are a printmaker. You are a painter. You do plenty of drawing. Does your process in terms of how you approach things, not technically, but how you approach things from a creative process, differ from medium to medium?
No, one of the speed bumps I wanted to use, but one of the challenges. There we go. One of the challenges of this whole process is that I want to create these moments where I'm uncomfortable. I don't want to be acting on. I don't want to be acting on the past as far as, well, I'll do that again. I don't want to repeat that scale. I want to be able to borrow from it if I need to. But my objective is not to use that, to repeat that scale, because it worked before. So in a way, I kind of want to be, like as a printmaker. I'll give you a solid example. I'm trained as an etcher. I'm trained in working on metal. I worked on it for 30 years. And etching and making multiples of prints from a metal matrix. I started teaching myself woodcuts about a year and change ago, and it's a very different medium. And certain things that I understand about it, I'm actually able to use. But certain things that I don't understand about woodcuts have been really throwing me. So I continue to okay, I'm going to have to, what's the problem that I'm having here and how do I solve it? And some of that problem solving is sort of, I want to call it like cross training, where I realize I have a color issue. I want to solve a color problem with a plate. And I can show you one of the plates a little later on. But what happens is, how do I solve this? It's a technical issue. How do I register color printing? How do I find the color that I want to use for color printing? And the way that I have to do that is to go back to, that's one of the reasons I started painting. Again, because I hadn't painted in over 20 years. And when I did start painting, I would suddenly look over to the wall on the other side of the room, and I'd look at one of the prints that I left up there to cause me to look at it to solve a problem. It's like, I still don't have a problem solved. But one day I'm working here in color. I glance over to the other side of the room, and holy smokes, I know what I need to do, and I go back to printing. So I kind of move back and forth in this process.
I want to follow up on that, but I want to get back to this question of uncomfortable. I just want to define the terms a little bit.
Sure.
Are we talking uncomfortable? I mean, uncomfortable often means using a process you don't know the outcome of.
Right.
But I think uncomfortable also translates into an element you want to put in your work. The work doesn't feel resolved. It has its dissonant moments. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think to me the best is the music analogy, where in music you create tension and then you resolve it. You hang on that note that's just that far from resolving back to your home tone.
Sure.
Is that something that you mess around with in terms of uncomfortability, in terms of trying to create that tension in your work?
Yeah, one of my biggest fears is that the moon has become a very big element in my life. And one of my biggest fears is I don't want them to be seen, nor do I want to think about them as landscapes. A landscape to me is a resolved landing. This is a landscape. Here it is. Here we are at the Grand Canyon, or here we are at the ocean. And no, I want to borrow from those qualities and carry it to another place, a plastic place, a place where the paint has a life of its own, where the elements have a life of their own. So subject-wise, it'd be, I don't want to say easy, but it would be a more comfortable solution to just paint the freaking landscape. But that is not what I'm interested in. It's to extract the essence of that and use it as a catalyst to go somewhere else. And that's an uncomfortable place. If that was comfortable, I'd just be painting landscapes.
Right, exactly.
So it's fascinating to me, because it's like they take on personal, almost spiritual kinds of references. The moon is like, I work in here a lot at night. And when I'm working in here, sometimes I'll step outside And when I step outside, if the moon is up, sometimes it just takes my breath away. It's just, I just look at it and I kind of gasp. It's like, oh my gosh. Now when I come back in, it's like, I don't want to reproduce that moon. I want to borrow that. I want to borrow some of the energy of that gasp and figure out how to use it. And sometimes the paint or the materials I'm using, they have a life of their own. They want to sing in a certain way, and it's not the way that I would. I don't want to just walk outside and say, "Oh, there's the moon. Oh, I'll paint it." Just what I saw. I don't want to take those kind of close notes. I want to use it as a sort of as a poem.
Let's go back a step to when did the moon become, just be horribly trite, an object of desire? When did you decide that the moon was going to be a topic of an ongoing series?
I didn't know it was going to be an ongoing series. I just couldn't stop looking at it, and I thought, what do I want to? How do I want to borrow it? And what I started to borrow was, at first, just the quality of light. Recognizing that there's this magnificent sphere up there catching light from someplace else, and we get to see little pieces of it or the whole thing, and it's just and it's a powerful secondary light source that it's like there's a cast shadow on the ground. And it's black. It's a blue-black shadow. And when I started seeing that, it's like that moonlight to me became I actually, as I trace the wires, it shows up in lots of pieces that I've made that weren't moon paintings, that weren't moon derived forms. But it was a fascinating, actually that deep blue-black that I saw cast on the ground from some object that was above me, that's what interested me in making prints. That's what interested me in etching, because it was this magnificent blue-black that I'd never seen before, and the closest I could get to it was making etchings, and some of the earliest etchings I did in some of the pieces that go back to my graduate studies were shadows from bridges, from interstate bridges that were cast across the highway. And I'd never seen a black like that before.
The absolutely wonderfully cool thing about the moon is that it's all reflected light. The moon is just a black orb.
Right.
It's a totally black orb reflecting light from the sun. And there's just something really very metaphysical and metaphorical about that. The fact that is it casting light? Is it reflecting light? I'm not sure what
It's reflecting light.
Yeah, it's reflecting light.
From a very powerful light source. And no wonder it's the home of so many creation stories, so many mythologies. I mean, it happens on so many different levels. The most revelatory thing I had was one of the times I went out and looked at the moon. I didn't even know it was up. I was working on something else. I walked out and I gasped. And as I gasped, all of those wait, this is what, this is, I'm becoming a lunatic, and I was like, and it's good, it's like, this is a very focused thing. And I started to see it in all the implications. I started reading mythologies, I started reading about creation stories. And every creation story, or many of them, have this idea, this concept of light. The maestro bird in Romanian literature, the Romanian mythologies of carrying the basket of light across the sky. The bird. The maestro bird. In Native American cultures, we see these creation stories. It's some pretty amazing. It's like, whoa, I'm want to be here and I want to spend some time here.
You know, when you think that this huge body out there actually has a physical presence in our life as well, in terms of creating the tides and menstrual cycles and all sorts of fairly amazing things. But in terms of the artistic process, you wanted to create something that wasn't just a landscape. You wanted to create something that wasn't representative, but something that was an abstract expression of a concept. How did you go about doing that? What was the process in terms of trying to express a concept of the moon, as opposed to, take the easy way out and just do a landscape and call it a day?
Well, there's an interesting thing I think that happens with materials. And sometimes the tactile understanding of how to use materials starts to take on a life of its own. I didn't plan, okay, I'm going to make this moon painting or this approach happen this way. And there's a point where I have some influences in my creative bones that have that draw some ties back to the surrealists. And I'm borrowing this stuff. And sometimes I feel like I'm just a conduit. My hand it was almost like I had this image of a Ouija brush, where the brush was just starting to find its way to the forms.
Right, but using that analogy, you have to ask the Ouija board a question. What's the question?
Well, the question was, teach me. The question was, you've got your framework. I have my framework for what I want, where I think I'm going. But where this moon's going to show up on this surface of this rectangle, or this.
So literally, the framework is the rectangle of the painting.
It has been, yeah.
Right. So we're not talking. So the framework is the rectangle of the painting.
But one thing about this is that the idea of painting becomes more important than the moon itself. There's a piece here on the wall that where I began to the painting asked me to break a piece away from it, to actually take it off the rectangle, to break the rectangle. And I'm still playing with that. I'm still exploring the possibilities of that. But it doesn't have to be a story told inside of that rectangular form. And so the actual structure that the story gets told on changes or can be changed.
So the painting asked you.
That seems crazy, doesn't it?
It doesn't seem crazy. I'm kind of curious what voice the painting uses when it asks you, but that's never mind. I guess I'm really intrigued by this process in which objects speak to us and tell us whether they work or they don't work. And that's really my next question, is what is that when you know it works and when you know it doesn't work, specifically with these moon paintings? What is that? Is it just an internal... Yeah, what's that process of knowing this works or this doesn't work? And I realize that this is an entirely nonverbal, ethereal process, but sometimes we just know, hey, that material doesn't work or that idea doesn't work.
Well, here's a way that I've been thinking about this in a way. I work sometimes I'm on the surface of something. I'm working with the formal properties of the object. And I got paint, I got a brush, I got ink, I got whatever I'm using. Okay. But there's a moment where I can begin to see into that form. There's a moment where all of a sudden there's this revelatory moment where I'm seeing into the thing and I'm seeing its possibilities. And that's where that further step inward, that maybe breaking away of a part of it or something happens. It's not a random, I think I'm going to cut this at that point. It's not until I can actually find a window into the form and see what else it can be. And that's where, to me, that's where the surrealist part comes in, because I'm actually visualizing, I'm actually seeing into it past the surface, past, well, nice rendering there, got this, got that going on. But the physical parts actually invite me to come into the story. I almost call it a story, but I think it's something else, you know. Story might be, so we'll use story as a stunt double right now, but.
Yeah. It also seems, though, thinking of your early experience in that drawing class in college, though, this is a skill that once you recognize it, you build that muscle over and over the years. I mean, I hate using baseball analogies, but I love using baseball analogies. It's like the first time you see the spin on a fastball and you see how to hit it. So you took that class and you learned how to see into a third dimension. And you've exercised that muscle for the last 50 years on how to see into that added dimension. Is that an accurate description?
It's accurate, but I can't always see into that. You know, there's sometimes where I'll work on a piece, and I'm a night owl. I work late, and I'll go to bed. You know, I'll bag it around 2 or 2:30, and the next morning I'll come back, and I want to see if what I saw or what I thought I saw was there, and if I can keep evolving that. And sometimes that what I can see becomes, takes on a life of its own. And the painting itself becomes almost like an object that I meditate on, you know. And it's like until I can reach that certain calibration place, then I can see into it. So, and there's a I guess when I start to see the possibilities of paint, sometimes they take on another dimension, because I begin to make, like there's several paintings in here that are the result of working from the moon, but they became paintings rather than moon paintings. They were from the moon, but not of the moon.
You were telling me before, you actually flipped one of the paintings over, and they became our good friend Fred.
Yeah. Well, you think you're doing something, and then you're shown that, yeah, you're doing something, but hey, guess what? Guess what else you're doing? Guess what more is going on here? And to me, that's one of the coolest parts, is that no matter what I'm doing, I was talking to a friend who I was in his studio looking at a painting he was working on, and he was working on it in a way that he was very faithful to the subject, and I had this. I realized, yes, but it's still a painting. It has a life of its own. The painting has to have. It's like you're not. It's a poem made with paint, and what you're trying to create is, a poem that comes from that thing that you've been observing. Right. And that's really that's a really different way of thinking about, whether you love him or hate him. I've been listening to Bob Dylan lately, and one of the things that Dylan does in a lot of his songs is that what the heck is going on in this story? He's telling the story of, I don't know, Lily Rosemary and the Jack of Hearts, and in the middle of that song, it's like he takes you next door where they're breaking into a bank vault, and somehow he brings it all back into the story. I think that the song or the poem or the painting, has a kind of a life of its own. And I think we also, as makers, have to pay attention to the materials and what the materials are asking. So when when you're constructing something with the specific boundaries of, it's a cabinet. It's going to be it's a decorative cabinet. It's it's something, it's a very specific thing. I think sometimes we get a little too singular. And I think by opening up that process, we can learn from the materials. That's where the painting talks to us. Most of these are watercolors, okay? I stretch the watercolor paper. So I soak it, the fibers expand, I tack it to a board with some gum tape, and as it dries, it sort of becomes almost like a drum head. And what that ensures me of is when I saturate that paper with a lot of water and paint, the paper doesn't buckle, because the paper's already got this tension going on. In one of the ones that I stretched, I came back the next day, the paper just split apart, had this split in the paper. The materials began to do something. And first I looked at it and I went, holy smokes, look, check that out. And then I thought, okay, how can I use that? Do I want to use that? Let's try to use that. I don't think I could reproduce that split, but it was such an organic, perfect, like the paper just kind of broke apart. After it did that, I realized, well, the paper that I'm working on, the material I'm working on, is this fibrous thing that has a life and a voice of its own, and maybe I want to let that voice ring out a little bit. You must take aim at something, direct your focus, and steer the consequences. In this, there can be no failure. Success can be elusive. It must, however, always be a process of focused pursuit. This is the part we pursue as conscious humans. Let's waste no more time.
So what are your final thoughts on these series of pieces? That you're obviously not done. You have more to work out with them, but how would you sum up this body of work to this point?
I would say that this body of work has a trajectory that's connected to my life. And as I continue to return to my studio and return to making these objects that borrow symbol systems in order to conjure some new force, some new form, I think all I can do is keep propelling and keep moving forward. I'm driven. I want to make, I want to leave behind a body of work that reflects my seriousness about being an art maker. I hope that time will be kind to me.
There you go. I Want to Paint the Moon with Steve Fishman, a part of our new Mind of a Maker series, and I invite you to watch the short film, which is a companion to this interview, on the video page of our website, y-make.com, or on our YouTube channel. I would like to thank Steve Fishman for being so patient and helpful in the long process of making this episode. And as always, why make? Why Make is a production of Rob Helmkamp and Erik Wolken, and you can help support Why Make by going to y-make.com and clicking on the donate button. All donations are tax deductible through our fiscal sponsor, Fractured Atlas.